Madam Chair, we are now live.
Good evening and welcome to the Town of Ajax Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting for Wednesday, October 20th, 2021. This meeting is being held electronically and live streamed on the internet. All staff and committee members are participating by phone or video. All regular practices and procedures of the committee continue to apply during this electronic meeting. If we encounter any technical difficulties, we may take a brief recess while they are resolved. Thank you for your patience. We will now proceed with the meeting. Are there any conflicts of interest from committee members with any items to be discussed this evening? I will ask for an aye in case I don't see you. Seeing as there's none, thank you. And if we can look for adoption of the minutes from the previous meeting dated September 22nd, 2021. Do we have a motion to adopt the minutes?
I motion that we adopt the minutes. Ray Smith.
Moved by Ray Smith, seconded by
Seppeline Deonorine.
Seppeline Deonorine. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. On a show of hands. I apologize. And that is carried. Moving on to presentation and discussion items. Under section 4. I'd like to welcome Derek Hannon, Manager of Bylaw Services. Derek is going to present an overview of the taxi bylaw review being undertaken to update and include various private transportation service providers such as Uber and Lyft. His presentation will provide context for proposed changes and then we'll be seeking feedback from the committee. Welcome, Derek.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me here this evening to give you a presentation. We decided, Sarah and I, through discussion, that we're going to go through the whole presentation. We've given some updates already to the age-friendly committee. We had a public engagement session yesterday, so we want to ensure that we keep the accessibility committee updated on what we're moving forward to. So Sarah's going to work my slides for me, so I greatly appreciate that as well. In 2005, the town passed our existing taxi cab licensing bylaw. We've made several amendments for that bylaw, both dealing with the amount of plate licenses and dealing with the maximum tariff rates since 2005. But essentially, it's been the same bylaw that we've been dealing with. The grounds back in 2005 that we passed the bylaw under were for consumer protection, public safety, and outlining a system of licensing, all required under the Municipal Act. And that bylaw in itself contained minimum and mandatory requirements on how the licensed taxi industry must maintain their fleets. It ensured that the taxi cab companies had to have insurance on their vehicles. We're going to get a bit more into that. It mandated about all drivers on what they were required to do between to be able to drive a taxi cab in the town. It provided requirements for taxi cab companies to provide an accessible fleet to the public. And it outlined the maximum tariff rates that had to be charged by all taxi cab companies. So no matter what taxi you took, the fares would all be equal based on distance and time that you were in that taxi cab. So what's been the biggest change? What's really prompting us to move forward today? Well, that is the ride sharing. We refer to it in town as TNC, Transportation Network Companies, and examples of that would be Uber or Lyft. And we really are trying to move forward to make sure that the system balances as best as we can. They'll never be equal, but trying to ensure a fairness and for both of the type companies, whether it's a TNC or whether it's a taxi. So the purpose of this review, again, deals with one purpose is to get rid of antiquated, archaic regulations that we had on the taxi fleet that right now should just be a system for the consumer to decide. Why we mandate in 2021 that all taxis belonging to a certain company must have the same color schemes, and Why all of them have to have matching hubcaps just doesn't make sense in 2021. If customers are not happy with the service they've received, then they should be the ones to pick why they're not going to use those services. In relation to our taxi cab licensing, we're going to get into a bit in a few more slides, but we want to look at providing a more flexible system for the actual taxi industry. Again, while I don't think we'll ever end up with an equal playing field, we're definitely trying to ensure that the ride sharing and the taxis are operating on a level or more level playing field. We want to ensure that the system that we come forward with is meeting the needs of the residents. May not meet everything that somebody wants, but we'll do the best we can. And we want to ensure that there's still an access to a reliable and appropriate sized accessible transportation fleet. When we talk about it, establishing a system of licensing, currently in Ajax, we have 5 licensed taxi cab companies that can operate. Out of those 5, we have somewhere in and around 70 active plates that are issued to those companies. Currently, each of those companies are required to have those plates on a vehicle. It needs to be Ontario licensed, it needs to have validation stickers, and it needs to have insurance on it all the time. What we've recognized now is that those companies don't need to have all those vehicles on the road at any given time. So what we're looking to do is allowing them the ability to run their business models that they see fit by putting plates on and off vehicles as they require. It also means that taxi cab insurance is extremely expensive. When we talk about ride sharing insurance, the drivers have access through their personal insurance to be able to add a feature that allows them to drive. Taxi cabs don't have that option. They're paying for their insurance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and it is extremely expensive. So now we're saying if their fleet doesn't need to have 15 vehicles on it, then take some of those cabs off the road and remove the insurance requirements. And we would allow that. TNCs now will be required to be licensed by the town, which currently they're not. We're talking about regulating fares. Currently, right now, as I pointed out, that each of our taxi cab companies are required to charge the rates that the town puts as the maximum rates they can charge. The existing system does not allow, other than a 10% discount, does not allow them to reduce their fees in any way other than what the meter says. What we want to say is to try and level that playing field again is allowing taxis to offer percent discounts for their fares. If they want to promote something over a holiday and have a 15 or 20% discount, that's up to them. If they want to offer flat rates, that's an advantage to their customers, then we're going to allow that to happen. Or promotions, we want to allow them to be able to do that. When it comes to ride sharing, we want to ensure that whatever the agreed upon fee is by the booking of the trip, that they are not permitted to deviate from that agreed upon. The town's position would be that when somebody accepts the app to say, send me the vehicle, that is a contract for that rate change. So we're telling them that once that has been accepted, they're not permitted to change that fee. We want to ensure that all transportation drivers, whether they're taxi or whether they're the TNCs, are all required to have a Class G Ontario driver's license. We want to ensure that they're producing either to the transportation, the TNCs, or the town, a driver's abstract with no demerit points and a criminal reference check with no demerit points, with no record on it. Our position would be that the town would be involved if anybody did have anything on their driver's abstract that involved demerit points or a criminal check. You know, if somebody was convicted of a fraud charge in 1979, that would still show up on their criminal reference check, but why they couldn't be a driver in 2021 with no reoccurrence. But that's something that the town wants to ensure that we are the licensing people. So we would give permission. So nobody would be permitted to drive unless we signed off on it. And currently now our taxi cab drivers are required to do a written test and a certificate from a doctor. The town's position now is with electronic features of giving receipts and with the ability of drivers to use all the GPS services that are available. We don't believe that the written test requirement is fair, and it also only applies to our taxi cab industry. And the point regarding a doctor's note is the Ontario government has stipulated that any of the drivers are fit to drive under a Class G license. Our position would be that that would be adequate to replace the whole doctor's note. We would still be ensuring that the vehicles, while we will not be moving forward with an age requirement, we still be ensuring that the vehicles all have current safety standard certificates submitted to the town yearly. So we know that all the vehicles every year has been safetied and all those requirements have been made. Excuse me, and every vehicle, whether it's TNC or taxi, must have a $2 million liability insurance policy on it while it's driving. It must name the town as an additional insured. So if the insurance is canceled for any reason, the town would be notified. And that obviously they have to complete records on that the vehicles are inspected, that they're looked at every day, and that all their maintenance records are kept. And at any time, they have to produce those records to the town when we request. Again, our concern being why we're attempting to deregulate the day-to-day operations. There's still issues about consumer protection and patron safety that we have to be concerned about. So we are continuing with the criminal reference checks, the vehicle safeties, and placing a maximum tariff card. So while they're free to lower the fees as they deem appropriate, we will ensure that they can't charge any more than the maximum the town has told them that they're allowed to charge. And again, the TNCs would be required to charge whatever the agreed upon rate is at the time of booking. And the town wants the consumer to start picking what vehicle companies based on promotion, discounts, whatever the case may be, that they deem to be appropriate. We don't want to be involved in the day-to-day operation of those businesses. Again, in establishing, I spoke about the 5 licensed companies. We just want to make sure that they don't need to keep all vehicles on the road at any given time. We want to make sure that they have the freedom to park vehicles as they deem appropriate. Summers tend to be a lower area for the taxi cab industry. When we get into beginning of school or winter, bad snowstorms, rainstorms, they need to be able to fluctuate that fleet, and we want to give them the freedom to put vehicles on and off the road as long as we're notified that the vehicles have been safetied. The only requirement from the town is to ensure that those companies are still providing 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week service, that somebody's not calling us the next day to say, I called for a taxi at 1 o'clock in the morning and nobody could come out and get me. And one of our last really big issues that this committee is going to be concerned about is the accessibility portion of the taxis. Right now, most of the TNC companies do not offer an accessible service, and that is for the physical needs where we talk about wheelchair vehicles. That is where we need to ensure that those services are still being offered. So in the current bylaw, it's still going to mandate that at least 2 accessible vehicles have to be provided in the 5 fleets. And that those are required to be maintained. If they want to drive in Ajax as a taxi cab company, that is going to be a requirement that they have to have 2 vehicles at any given time ready to go on the roads if needed. But when we talk about the TNCs not being able to provide those services, what we'd be looking at doing, which some of our neighboring municipalities have looked at, is a fee required to supplement the fact that they don't have accessible services. And we would use the revenues from there for incentive or grant programs for our taxi cab industry that will be requiring those to help pay for some of the costs that would be required to retrofit their vehicles, or when they're doing new purchases, that we would be able to help them in some way to help offset some of those costs. So we're looking forward to moving forward with that. And creating some programs that might give them some incentives to make sure that those vehicles are up and running well. Exactly what that system is going to look like, we're not quite sure yet, but that's what we're working on at this time. So when we talk about our next steps, so last night we did our virtual consultation. The session regarding our taxi consultation period is running between October 1st and the 31st. I'll ask politely if Sarah can email out the links for the surveys that we have, and we would greatly appreciate if you could take a few minutes and complete a survey. And this Friday, we're meeting with the industry. In the morning, I believe we're meeting with the taxi industry. In the afternoon, we're meeting with the TNC services, or it could be vice versa. I'm not entirely sure. But that really concludes our public engagement sessions and the industry sessions. But we're hoping to get a lot of feedback from our individual taxi cab users. That's who we want to model the businesses around, to see changes that they're happy with. And again, to make sure that we're meeting the needs for the accessible services. November 12th will be the last day to submit formal comments regarding changes people want to see in the bylaw. We took an email today that was quite in-depth from one of our taxi cab companies that wanted to see specific changes. November 30th will be the final draft of the town's 2021 private transportation bylaw, and it will be available online to be viewed through the Community Affairs and Planning CAP agenda. And December 6th is when we will be going forward with our public meeting for the discussions of that bylaw, and anybody who wishes has right to become a delegation to speak at that if they have concerns regarding what our draft bylaw looks like, or if they want to come out and support. Either way, there'll be a process to be able to get put onto the agenda to speak to that. And on December 13th, we'd be looking for the bylaw to be passed. Now, the great question came up last night in our public suppression. We wouldn't be looking for the new bylaw to come into place on December 13th. We'd be looking as a transition period in the bylaw for a date that it would be coming active, and maybe that would be the end of January or mid-February. That's what we're going to be in consultation both with the taxi industry and with the TNCs to find out what would be an appropriate day to get everybody licensed and get the fleets up and running. So that concludes my presentation, and I will be more than happy to take any questions that anybody may have.
Hi, Ray Smith, got a question?
Go ahead, Ray.
Hi, excellent presentation again. I know this is my second time around with you, but just as impressed. Question for you about, you talk about services with the taxi companies and ride sharing, but we never talk about education, about specifically about accessibility and the consequences of that education. What I mean by is, having said that, is what if a driver refuses a guide dog? I know it's done, but are there consequences, if they're licensed through the town of Ajax? If they, just one instance, if they don't, if they refuse a guide dog.
That's a great question, Ray. And through the chair, my comments would be that the town is always open, whether it would be a question about refusing guide dogs, whether it be rude service, whatever the case may be, because the town licenses both the companies and the drivers. We would be more than happy to field those concerns and follow through and ensure that they're complying with the bylaw. And again, with provincial legislation as well. So if we receive that information, we would do education. It would say common sense says that they should realize when it comes to being working dogs that they have no choice but to take them. But that's not always, common sense isn't always common practice. So we could create an education program the same as we did with the Respect the Space. We could create something in the taxi industry about sending out constant reminders to the fleet about things to be careful of. And one of them could be about the accessibility needs as well.
Perfect. Just another quick question is, you talk about the fleet, you talk about licensing taxis in Ajax. As you know, if I'm a Uber user, but if I order a Uber cab, taxi, of course, it doesn't have to originate from Ajax. So let's say he comes back from Mississauga. Is he or she abiding by the Mississauga rules and regulations, or when he's in Ajax, abides by Ajax?
They would be following our regulations. Where our regulations would kick in is for a ride that starts within Ajax.
Perfect.
Heather Steves, member of the ACC. I have a question for you, Derek, and this is regarding the accessibility of a taxi cab. Will they still be having those separations in between the driver and the passengers in the back? I had an experience. Now, I do use a scooter, but that particular day, I had rented a vehicle and I was returning it to the place of origin. So I required a taxi to come and get me, and the driver would not let me sit in the front. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to use the back seat. So the back seat is definitely an issue for me. So that means it's not an accessible ride for me. Do you have any comments on that? Thank you.
So again, I think in the accessible world is something we would have to look into, but ultimately, the entire industry frowns upon anybody sitting in direct contact with a driver. There's many municipalities that mandate that there has to be a physical divide between drivers and any and all passengers at any time while they're engaged in driving the vehicle. Whether somebody reaches forward and grabs the steering wheel, it's not so much about the driver's safety, it's the whole vehicle that they're trying to protect. In that particular case, in an accessible world, I would be more than interested to look in and find out what's reasonable. But currently, right now, we wouldn't have regulations about separation. We don't mandate it. It would really be an independent question. But if it came up where the physical needs needed to utilize the front seat, that is a bigger question that both the occupational health and safety, the safety of the driver, contracts, business owners would all have to comment on.
And that's my experience. So that really makes it that I can't use a taxi in Ajax. They just are not accessible, and some of them are. They have their seat back so far, so even if you are trying to get in the back, I just can't do it. And then they don't want to let me use the front. So there I have a problem, and I'm not sure how to handle that one.
So again, it's something we can look in case by case, but I couldn't comment on it right now. There is that balance between occupational health and safety and what they have to do to protect their drivers as well. So those are all concerns, but it's something the town would be more than happy to look into.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from committee members? There being none, thank you so much, Derek, for that presentation. And with your email listed on the screen, I'm sure that we can email you through Sarah possibly if anything does come up.
Absolutely. And once again, I just want to thank everybody for allowing me to come tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Have a wonderful meeting.
You too. And next on our agenda, 4.2, is the Ajax Community Awards nomination discussion. And Sarah has asked committee members to consider potential nominees from our last and earlier meetings this year. Is there any feedback from the committee? As the committee already put forward a regional accessibility award nomination for resident Liz Wallace, and her idea brought forward for communication boards in Ajax parks, would the committee be interested in nominating her for a local accessibility community award? If so, a motion would be required.
Thanks, Madam Chair. If I can just jump in there and just add a little
yes.
bit more context. The deadline to submit nominations for these awards is early November before our next meeting. And I know it tends to be our typical process as the committee that whomever we put forward for a nomination for the regional award, just by virtue of the order of the awards, is then passed on for a nomination at the local level. But again, it's completely open to the committee, just throwing that out there as a suggestion, as I hadn't received any other feedback from members directly, but this is definitely an opportunity to speak to it if there are other ideas out there as well.
Well, I nominate to accept that we nominate Miss Wallace. Heather Steves.
Sarah, I will endorse that also to nominate her. Since we haven't put forward any local candidate, I think the regional candidate, I endorse her.
So just for clarification, she is a local Ajax resident, but just in the order of the award nominations, we submit to the regional award first, and then later in the year is the local Ajax Community Awards. So she's still an Ajax resident in both nominations, but they're two separate awards. One is
Yes,
with the
correct.
region and one is locally.
Correct.
So are there?
Madam Chair, it sounds like there's a motion on the floor
So
moved by.
the motion to accept Liz Wallace as our nomination for the Ajax, the Local Accessibility Community Award.
I second the motion. Ray Smith.
I think Seppaline did, Madam
Oh,
Chair.
she did. Sorry, she did.
Heather posed the motion and Seppaline seconded it.
Yeah.
We call all in favor.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? No. So at this time, we will be submitting Ajax resident Liz Wallace and her idea for the communication boards in Ajax as our local accessibility community nominee.
Thank you, committee members. I'll work with Heather, Seppaline, and Roseanne to compile the nomination package and circulate that for everybody to review.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And our next item on the agenda, 4.3, the treat accessibility update. So Sarah will provide a brief update following the presentation from Rich at last month's meeting.
Yes, so I'm just trying to see, I've got too many tabs open at the moment. Hopefully this is what's showing up on your screen now, a purple poster. Let's see here. Some exciting news. You all know that we had Rich Padullo from the Treat Accessibly movement present at our committee meeting last month. And we've continued the conversation with Rich and his team in terms of how we can support this initiative here in Ajax. So in partnership with the Ajax Public Library, we currently have 300 of these lawn flags, Treat Accessibly lawn flags, available for pickup completely free across the 3 branches at the library. And we're running a little contest in conjunction with the flag pickup. We are encouraging anybody who picks up a flag to send us a photo of their setup for an accessible trick-or-treating station. And we're hoping that you can stage that and sort of do a practice run by October 29th, because we have a huge accessibility trick-or-treats-a pizza party prize pack available that has everything you need for an accessible and inclusive Halloween in terms of edible and non-edible trick-or-treats to hand out, lots of great accessibility tips, as well as a gift card for your friends and family to have a pizza party on Halloween night. So really encouraging people to get involved and pick up their flag from any of the library branches and submit that photo by the 29th of October for your chance to win. In addition to that, this Saturday at the Ajax Downs, we are running the Drive-In Pumpkinville event, which will have a show, I think, 3 times throughout the day. It is unfortunately completely booked up with a wait list at the moment, so hopefully you've got your tickets. But there will also be giveaways at that event, and included in the giveaways, Rich has provided a double-sided postcard for all participants to learn more about the Treat Accessibly initiative, as well as fantastic tips on how you can be an accessibility ambassador and make sure that your trick-or-treating is inclusive for everybody this Halloween. So great to see that we can support that, as well as there's been some social media messaging through the town's channels. And we really look forward to building the momentum with this initiative as the years go on, especially when we're back to more in-person type gatherings. But it's excellent to see the support from the library and the recreation and culture team and communications team to get behind and champion this awesome initiative. I think I have other pictures here. Oop, that one's way too big. This is a picture of the prize pack, I think. you guys do that. So it's done like a giant trick or treat bag. It's got all your candies and your the other little non-edible treats and your gift card. And then I think I had one more picture. So then like the top tips for how to make your Halloween inclusive for everybody. And there are also flyers on display at all 3 of the community centers promoting the contest, as well double-sided with the accessible trick-or-treating tips and tricks too. Happy to take any questions or comments, or if anybody has any.
That's a wonderful initiative that I'm so glad that we can participate this year, because I think we didn't get the full experience, obviously with COVID and in past years when this was presented. Wonderful. And moving on to, if there's no additional questions from committee members, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, the annual report to council. So Sarah and myself would like to see feedback and suggestions for content to be covered during the report. Are there any key items from over the past year that any of the committee members would like to bring forward?
Hi, Ray Smith speaking. I should have neglected to ask when we did the accessibility awards, and this may be something for council as well. Maybe a wrap up of our accessibility week. You know, and I know, having said that, I know we went to the public for a contest and talked about the accessibility, any accessibility businesses or successes. I'm just wondering if there's any results from that public inquiry, I guess, and you know, if we can talk about accessibility, there are successes on the accessibility week.
Through the chair, those are great suggestions, Ray. Unfortunately, we actually didn't get any uptake or response for our all-star request or call for stories in the community, but that's not to say it's not something that we can continue to promote on an ongoing basis, because new things are always happening in our community. So great to kind of keep that momentum behind that initiative. So that's perhaps something I can speak to our communications department about, that every so often we're continuing to promote that we're looking to hear those stories about what's going on in our community to break down barriers or prevent and remove barriers. So great suggestion there. And definitely, yes, we typically do include a wrap up of our National Access Awareness Week initiative. So we'll make sure that that's a priority.
And through the chair, it could be a challenge to the councillors as well to highlight any, you know, accessibility all-stars as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult sometimes in terms of, we do as staff and council have to sometimes be separate from those types of initiatives, because we want to make sure that it is transparent and accountable from a public perspective. So definitely something I'm sure that they would be interested in supporting and championing those that come forward, but it might be more so of a potential conflict to have them seek those out within the community itself.
Oh, you're such a good politician. Very good. Thank you.
Any other ideas from committee members?
We still have some time, Madam Chair, so perhaps it's a little bit of a homework assignment, and I know we're missing a few people tonight, so to follow up by email and get those gears turning, and maybe perhaps you and I can put our minds together and flesh out a draft of some sort and circulate that for some feedback.
Yes, we certainly can. That's great. Okay, so you do have some time, committee members, to send us the feedback. And moving on in our agenda, our next item is feedback from Accessing Our Heritage virtual conference that took place today from 12 p.m. to just short of 5 p.m. Do we have any feedback from anyone who attended the conference today?
I hope you don't mind me giving feedback. I didn't get in. I tried and tried and tried. It took me an hour. I said, forget it.
Yes.
Go ahead, Madam Chair.
I was going to say, I have to agree that signing in wasn't as accessible as I would have hoped. There were several clicks that you had to go through that weren't as obvious. I've never had to go through that in order to enter a Zoom webinar. So
through the chair, I'm glad you said that, because tomorrow I'm going to, or I'll be attending a virtual, it's called Connecting the Dots through the CNIB. It's a 2-day conference. And I just got the registration through the CNIB. Oh my goodness, what a difference. Nice large print, so very clear. I should say, Sarah, I would like to share it with you, because it's like day and night. Now, this was not, this is, I'm going to be blunt. That was a disgrace, what we saw today, to get in. I don't know what the event was like, and I would love to hear, but getting in, that would turn my stomach if, we talk about accessibility. Sorry, the bluntness.
No, I think your comments are quite appropriate, Ray. And I know in the past, prior to this term, and I think it was even the term before, when we actually had the opportunity to attend some events in person as a committee, that we did often encounter some accessibility concerns. And it was always sort of the standpoint from this committee that it was important to share that feedback with those event organizers, not from a point of criticism, but just as you like to point out, Ray, from that educational piece, right? So if there is interest there, I know unfortunately you didn't get to participate live today. We are supposed to be receiving recordings. It is a long time block, so I'm hoping that it will be segmented into the particular sessions that they divided it up within. But definitely from an evaluation standpoint, I'm happy to circulate any evaluation links that come through. As a registrant, you should also receive that directly. And if there's something further that other participants wish to sort of put together, I'm in support of that as well. It's an important thing to make sure that we're sharing that feedback in order to help them improve the next time, right?
Again, through the
Steve. Oh, sorry, Ray.
That's okay. That's okay. Through the chair, I'd like just to know, how was the conference, whoever went?
Yeah. It didn't get much better, Ray. I managed to finally get in. I had to download Zoom, but around 20 after 12, I finally got in, and I had a university student here doing some odd jobs for me, and she even couldn't understand what we were supposed to do. So I did download a new Zoom, as it also told me I had to do. And then it wanted to charge me to get in. And I thought, no, I'm not paying. So then I started all over from the beginning. Like, it was like a circular, just going around and around and around. And I thought, you know what, I finally got in. And I just, by that point, I was pretty frustrated and pretty exhausted trying to figure out what was going on. And then they lost power. I was thrown out of the meeting. I thought, oh my goodness gracious. So that's my experience. So I concur. It just was a nightmare. I didn't bother going back. I thought, you know what? I'm just not going to deal with this. So there you go. That was my experience.
Okay. Any others that would like to speak to?
I'm not sure, Madam Chair, if there's anybody else on the call, the meeting tonight that was in attendance.
So I did get in, and I know that they signed in late. I didn't know about the power outage, as you mentioned, Heather, but they did start late. So they had actually 3 main speakers that also could not connect to the meeting, to the conference. So that was unfortunate. One of the things that stood out to me is of the approximately 12 presenters, in terms of the leadership positions involved in heritage, most of them are architects. There's also a lack of representation of the Black, Indigenous, and people of color population. And also, only one person expressed that she has an invisible disability. So I really feel that there was only one representative of our population then that we represent. The only diversity was in the ASL interpreters that they had. All three of them were from the BIPOC community. And so most of it was speaking to the trying to make main streets accessible. So of course in the Durham region particularly, and well, even outside of that, a lot of rural suburban areas have main street areas that have buildings that were built in the early 1900s, late 1800s, that never even thought of accessibility at that point in time. So much of the discussion was on presenting this change of framework, a change of thinking. You know, one speaker that stood out to me was Michael McClelland. And he flat out stated that everything has heritage value, and then we need to get away from seeing accessibility as just barrier-free access, but universal access. We understand that, but you know, I guess for the majority of the population, that's not always obvious. And thinking about really ingraining in society, you know, what do we need access to, and what do we want to try to impress on people? And he did make mention to our younger millennial population that all of these issues are related to social equity. And, you know, our culture has to be a culture of yes, and not, you know, what's the problem. I went to the breakout rooms. Sorry, I just see what that other breakout room was. The next generation, training gaps and opportunities. And, you know, again, it was very high level. So the professionals in there are architects, and they research and they teach. But one thing that came out of that I really liked was when Haley Neighbors mentioned accessibility and heritage are coming up together more often, as opposed to being seen as, quote, diametrically opposed. So that was one takeaway from there that I really liked. And the other breakout room I went to was accessibility solutions for heritage buildings. And I did get to take a couple of screenshots, and that was the group that David Lepovsky, I think, was supposed to be in. So they referenced a YouTube video that's about 1 hour and 13 minutes with chapter markings. So Sarah, I don't know if you have knowledge of that YouTube video, but I'm almost thinking that it's something that
To share with the committee.
You could share with the committee, yes.
Yeah, I didn't get the actual link to it. I don't think that was the session I was in at that time, but when we get the recording materials, definitely I'll pull that out and make sure we can highlight it for everyone.
Oh, wonderful. And, you know, something that stuck out from that session for me is that in 40 years, the building code has not changed. So that is something that would have to be worked on. Otherwise, another statistic is that I don't think we even have this at the forefront of our minds, but the Accessible Canada Act is due in 2040, which means that all of Canada will be accessible by year 2040. For Ontario, we know it's 2025. And I have other notes, but I think I got the main points. You know, and I think just to close off the discussion is that one of the speakers mentioned that we don't have to wait for legislation or the law to tell business owners what to do. If they see that something is presently needed, they can go ahead and get that done. And I think that's important to communicate to people, just because it takes so much time for building code to change or for legislation to change.
Absolutely. Madam Chair, just to add and to close off on your point there, similar themes were this throughout the sessions that I attended. One was sort of bridging that gap between accessibility and heritage and how we build that connection and communication between both committees, which is definitely something that I know my counterpart on heritage, Mike Sawchuk, is interested in as well. So if there's opportunities in the future to do things more collaboratively between both committees, you're both statutory committees, you both have very valuable perspectives going through these type of review processes. So I think that's a good takeaway for us. And to your point about why wait for legislation, one of the speakers, I can't remember which one it was, said the building code needs to be viewed as the basement. That's sort of the bottom line of what is required to be done. But you're right, there isn't anything stopping anyone from going above and beyond other than the initiative, right? And it's all about that shift in mindset of understanding that you can go beyond that and there's benefit and value to do so. And I think that that's something that this committee continues to advocate for when we do review of our site plans. So lots of good speakers. Would there ever be any interest? I know we've talked about it in the past before, but on a much smaller scale, would there ever be interest in doing something maybe more collectively with the AACs and heritage committees within the region to kind of have a forum or a discussion about how the two portfolios converge?
Hi, Ray Smith speaking. There's always good opportunities through any AAC committees in Durham, because I think the more we talk together and collaborate, the better. So I certainly agree.
Okay. It's just something for staff to sort of keep in the back of our minds as we go forward and get into the planning of things.
If I can speak to that a little bit, from just observing the other committees over the past few years at our annual Regional Accessibility Award sessions, our Accessibility Advisory Committee is very diverse in terms of ability and just visible identity. I wonder if we should see our connection, like just flesh out our connection with heritage a little bit more before connecting with other municipalities. Just because I think we can build, the town of Ajax can build more on what is inclusive in the heritage. I say this because it also stemmed from the conference where there are the only heritage that is put on display are the wins or the happy things. We don't display the things that are that as we know tied in with the Truth and Reconciliation Act. So Every Child Matters, the rights of the indigenous population. And even, if we go as far back as the Underground Railroad, I know it was more St. Catharines area, but you never know because it just hasn't been uncovered.
Even so institutionalization for mental health.
Sorry?
Institutionalization for mental health.
Oh, there we go. So we do have, yes, we do have that existing. So I think we should build on the town of Ajax. I pose this to the committee though. I welcome your feedback that maybe we can strengthen our town and then look at our neighboring municipalities to see if they share similar ideas, similar experiences, and then branch out from there. Just because I'm not sure if we would relate, say, to Skoogog or to the Brock and such, right? It might be very different. But
that's a very fair point. And why not start local first? Why not build a great relationship within the two committees that we have here, right?
Anyone have any feedback on
We
that?
lose anybody?
Ray Smith speak.
Just us.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Ray. Yeah.
Ray Smith speak. Just having said that, what you just said, Sarah, is it worth having a full meeting with the, I don't know, you've mentioned one person on the Heritage Committee. I don't know anybody else. I'm sure they don't know us as well. So that's a good point. I wonder if we can just have a meeting, a get-together meeting with both committees, get to know each other.
It's a great point, Ray. And traditionally, if anybody's been with us longer than the past couple of years, we do usually do an annual joint event with all of the committee members across all of the committees, but COVID's kind of put a damper on that for now. But definitely, yes, just sort of a joint committee meeting or even a joint subcommittee meeting between members could be something of interest.
Food for thought. Good.
Wonderful. So if there's no other feedback on the virtual conference, we will move on to item 5 on our agenda, correspondence. We do not have any correspondence at this time. And item number 6 on our agenda is update from council. Well, Councillor Bauer sends her regrets for this evening, so we will look forward to her update next month. And moving on to item 7, our external committee updates. So 7.1, we have the age-friendly Ajax steering committee. And Ray, do you have anything to share with us?
There was 2 outstanding topics at the last week's age-friendly committee meeting. One was Derek, which is good. He did a great presentation, and I think it's timely to get some direction with the taxis and Ubers and ride sharing. But there was another conversation about the trails and concerns about bikes on trails and signage, bikes not ringing their bells, and safety as well. So there was quite a lengthy discussion on trails and concerns about safety with bikes. So I think that will be going forward as well in the near future. But other than that, no updates.
Thank you, Ray. Does anyone have any questions for Ray? There being none, I will move on to 7.2, our Regional Accessibility Advisory Committee update. So we had our last meeting on September 28th, and there was a presentation on a micro home pilot project by Alan Robbins. So it was discussing supportive housing for those who are unsheltered, and it would provide supports until they can work toward permanent housing. And they went into quite the detail of how that functions. Another presentation was by, a Durham resident, Ryan McCall, but he moved to London for a number of years and studied music. And now he's partnered with a friend of his who's an engineer, and they founded Inclusive Instruments. So their website is inclusiveinstruments.org. And they go on a person-by-person basis. And for anyone who wants to play an instrument but needs that instrument to be adapted for the person, they do that. And they provided some wonderful examples of ones that they've configured for a person to be able to use. Say, for example, someone doesn't have all of their fingers, or they have limited, or they cannot hold the instrument but can play the instrument, for example. They've made those adaptations. So I would encourage you to check out inclusiveinstruments.org. And Rhonda Mulcahy, the counselor in Whitby, talked about the autonomous vehicle project that's happening, where it's a test project for a public transit bus to run on it by itself, basically run by itself. But there would be a monitor in the vehicle to make sure that it's working properly. And actually this Friday, they've asked the regional accessibility members and Whitby Accessibility Advisory Committee members to go and test it out with everyone. So that's happening on Friday. And that would be my report for the Regional Accessibility Advisory Committee. Does anyone have any questions or clarification? And wonderful. Does anyone have any other business to share? Okay, with nothing to share, we will move on to the, oh, Sarah, yes?
Sorry, just for matter of public record, as a follow-up from last month, we had an item in our new business regarding concerns with pedestrian connectivity at the 95 Bailey Plaza. And I know I've reported through committee, but just for the purposes of anybody else who was tuning in, I did take the matter to our bylaw services, who were able to speak with the property manager on site. And there has been a dedicated pathway painted across the parking space that was continually being parked in, which was impeding the access to the barrier-free connection. So there is now a painted pathway across the drive aisle that connects with the curb cut on one side to the sidewalk around the plaza, as well as to the ramp sidewalk up to the bus stop on Bailey. So thank you again. I believe it was Heather who brought that to our attention. And it was great to see that although we didn't really have a lot of enforcement, our bylaw services were able to speak with the property manager and create an understanding of why this was a significant barrier and an issue. And kudos to the property manager for taking the initiative to remedy that particular barrier.
Wonderful, thank you. And if there is nothing else to share, I will ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Heather Steves, motion to adjourn.
Second by Ray Smith.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.